Good afternoon. I think we should probably get going. And I'm going to do something that my teachers at one point in my life may have done and said, please come on forward. You know, we're not going to bite you. There's lots of seats around the board table. This is one of the few opportunities some of you will have to sit around the World Bank board table. We can maybe try and table some decisions. We can, anyone need a job? We can work something through. But really, do come forward. Lots of seats at the front. Don't be shy. We do have this this amazing venue here. It's a drizzly day outside, but we are here for a sunny look at the future of manufacturing. Or so I thought until I picked up a copy of the report that is really the subject of our discussion here, which is Trouble in the Making, ? On the future of manufacturing-led development, and really one of the major issues that kind of hangs over the global economy now. I am Sean Donnan. I'm the World Trade Editor for the Financial Times. I cover trade and international economics here in Washington, which is a really interesting subject nowadays. And we spend a lot of our time thinking about not just what the folks down the road are thinking about the global system and trade and so on, but also about the future of work, the future of manufacturing, where the jobs are going to come from, and how that might affect not just business in the global economy, but also politics and so on. Something that we at the FT spend a long time thinking about. So I was very excited when the folks here at the bank very generously asked me to moderate this discussion. We've got some fantastic folks up here at the table from business, the bank, even the UN has come to visit, and we're going to work through the discussion and go from there. So let me just very quickly introduce our panelists. In the red jacket is Mary Hallward-Driemeier, who is here at the bank and is one of the authors of this Trouble in the Making report. Sitting next to her is Raj Rao, the CEO of Ford Smart Mobility, or as I just joked to him, the guy who's going to put us all in autonomous cars pretty soon. Fascinating. Really looking forward to hearing from you about where things are going. We've got another Raj in the room, Raj Batra, who has come all the way from Siemens, but also from Detroit, who is the president of the Digital Factory USA at Siemens. Really looking forward to hearing about that. Just been hearing a lot about how I should come visit Detroit, which has gone through an amazing urban renaissance. And then finally we have Mr. Li Yong, who has flown in from Vienna, Director General of the UN Industrial Development organization. So thank you so much for joining us here today. So we'll kick it off with really you, Mary. I mean, I really want you to walk us through what you found in this report. You've just published this. What are you seeing? What are the big trends?
Well, thank you very much. I just want to say, sort of, first of all, when you were highlighting the title of it, the question mark is actually a really important part of that title, because I think it's at a point where there's a lot of hype. There are a lot of headlines that are quite alarmist. There's a lot of focus on the developed countries, and we felt it was an important time to put a bit more of a question around this and to both balance the emphasis that's been on the richer developed countries with what this agenda means for developing, and to weigh some of the evidence against some of the potential alarmism. And there can be some cause for concern, and there is certainly risk of disruption and displacement, but that a huge impact overall is going to be determined by how much of an opportunity it is and how well all of us are helping countries, but workers and firms to be able to take advantage of new opportunities. And we wanted to really underscore that part of the agenda. When we looked at some of the different trends, we focused on three. So the first one, which you can see in this image, is one around new technology, particularly labor-saving technology, and focused primarily on process technology. So we did things like robotics, 3D printing, the sort of smart factories, because this is technology that can be used to make anything, not just sort of advanced new products, but furniture, clothes, potentially, consumer durables, vehicles, all sorts of things. So it is relevant for all the countries, whether or not they're using the new technology or not. And the sort of use of automation, and often symbolized with robots, is it does change the dynamics in different ways that make the traditional comparative advantage of a lot of developing countries potentially less relevant. That the traditional sort of emphasis on low-wage locations as an attractive place for manufacturing really may not be sufficient going forward, and what that might mean in terms of being competitive. The 3D printing may also change some of the sort of scale economies. Rather than having concentrated production in one place, it may be a chance to have lots of production in different places and change some of that model. So we wanted to look at how automation mattered, and to note that while a lot of the developed countries are adopting it, the single biggest user at the moment of robots in particular is China. A second theme that we wanted to look at the implications was the changing nature of trade and international competition. So trade has been slowing down, particularly in goods trade, and particularly actually in those subsectors that have been intensive in global value chains. So this has been an area of opportunity for a number of developing countries, but those sort of sectors that are most intensely traded in that those regards, things like electronics, actually transportation equipment, are ones where some of that slowdown has been greatest. And there's also been a much greater sort of concentration of certain big players capturing a larger part of the market, and what that would mean for other developing countries being able to get in on the action in that sense. And then the last trend around servicification. So again, this will fit in very nicely with other panelists, that an increasing sort of blurring between what is manufacturing and what is services, an increasing importance of services making it possible to be successful in manufacturing, but a bigger part both of the value added and potentially jobs coming in the services that help pre-production and post-production, and a whole new set of services that are being embedded in goods, things like apps on your phone or post-production, post-sale services. And so looking for where there could be opportunities in those fields too. So those were the three trends we were primarily looking at.
Fantastic. I mean, I'm fascinated by that question of location, obviously, which is such a political question oftentimes, where we see an administration here that is intent on bringing manufacturing back, but we also look overseas at governments in the developing world, in places like Africa, where really, the future used to be manufacturing, and we question where that future is now. Raj, from Siemens, wanted to come to you and just ask that question. How much are these new technologies changing how you think about where you locate production?
Yeah. There you go, the bottom left. Thank you. That's legible now.
I think you just voted.
All right, very good. Well, I guess the point that I would make first is, being one of the world's largest manufacturers in our own right, we experience all the pain that our customers feel in bringing products to market quickly. Time to market's a decisive factor, being present in 190 countries around the world. But, with us, we have a very wide diversity in our portfolio. We produce hundreds of thousands of products, from sensors and actuators to very complex high-speed rail and power gen and magnetic resonance imaging for the healthcare industry. And with that mix, it's really not a vanilla strategy for us in terms of, how we think about manufacturing. But the reality is, we're entering into this world of digitalization. So about a quarter of the world's economy is going to be digital in a few years. I think all of you have heard the stats, 1 trillion connected devices by 2030, not just in the developed world, but the developing world. And something we always look at is roughly half the world's data was generated in just less than last year, if you really think about it. So our production locations are going to continue to be driven by this notion that customer preference and customization is going to play an incredibly important role in how we produce. And that's not always easy to predict. What we know for sure is time to market in manufacturing is the most decisive factor in industry. People that have a first mover advantage, that get to market quickly, are going to be the ones that prosper. And you think of the great examples out there today of people that have orders on the books, pent-up orders, that really can't get these out to market quick enough, and you're losing competitive ground. So, and it's going to be technology that lets you get to market faster. But, a good example of this, I want to use just one example because I always think it's good to put it in practical terms. When we think about a company like Adidas, it's an iconic consumer brand. I think, Mary, you make a reference to that in your book, and I saw that in your brief. They make about 300 million pairs of shoes every year, and demand is rising, but it's still not good enough because people want more customization, more personalization of that product. And so what were behemoth factories are now becoming very small, agile, sophisticated factories that can be digitally designed and simulated before anything physical is done in that factory. And they're putting up these speed factories, and what took 18 months from the design and ideation of a product to the manufacture of that product, by the time you outsource it and whatnot, is cut down to about it's cut down to a week. And this is all because they can simulate, they can digitize, and they can use these advanced technologies. So in a sense, the way we think about it is digitalization is a great equalizer. And artificial intelligence and data are really today the most precious raw material in the world. And so it's going to lower the barriers to entry. Manufacturing, we always said, used to be a very rich person's game. You needed physical capital, you needed a production line, you needed a factory to do what you were going to do. And today you can simulate and digitize things even before you talk about doing anything physical and perfect it. And that perfection can happen anywhere. Okay, thank you.
Raj, how are these new technologies affecting how you guys go about production at Ford?
The correct button. Okay. So, a great question. Thank you. I want to build on what Mary and Raj also said. When we think about advancements in manufacturing technology, I think robotics and use of additive manufacturing process, and also changing the material composition of things that go in cars and vehicles, is an irreversible trend. And because innovation and technology always trumps. Because we always want to see progress in the way we use things, the way we make things. I think there's obviously the risk that there'll be job substitution. So the job that could have gone to someone on the manufacturing line might go to a robot. We don't experience that. What we really experience in reality is a productivity gain. So if you think about urbanization in a market like my hometown in India, the per capita, mobility index of 20 vehicles per 1,000 compares to 800 in the U.S. And it's a known fact that India hasn't urbanized at the rate that it needs to, and it needs to do a lot more with mobility capacity. With that is going to come demand for more manufacturing. The question I think that you're posing, Mary, is will that be done in an automated way? And Raj is saying that we have to embrace that technology. I think that's the only way to make it cost effective. Because if you apply the same methods we're applying in elsewhere, that vehicle will be out of reach of people. People won't be able to afford mobility. So I think we're going to see an increase in demand for manufacturing, and the way companies will respond, in particular, what we are trying to do is to increase the customization and localization of our manufacturing footprint. We can't make stuff in one market and then just drop it into another market, because it's shown us over time that strategy does not work. So localization and customization by definition is a great place to absorb new innovation. Whether it's, as Mary said, the servicification of stuff. People don't buy disconnected things anymore. When you spend 25-30% of your disposable income on a mobility product, you're expecting that to be connected to your phone, you're expecting that to be connected to the experience you want to have. So we're going to go into a place where robotics and visual computing is going to help us put that connectivity in an economical way into the vehicle. The second thing we're noticing is many of, especially millennials, like sharing stuff. When I grew up, I had the same aspiration as Raj there. I wanted to have my driver's license and get my own car. I think people still have that aspiration, but more importantly, they want to be mobile. and they want stuff fetched to them. They want stuff to be dynamic. So by definition, these vehicles and the manufacturing has to recognize the service component of how a product gets used. You can't separate hardware and manufacturing from service. Those two have to be connected. So for example, the extended footprint of manufacturing might be the service footprint. So how does the vehicle get serviced? How many jobs can we add in that value chain? Because these vehicles are going to travel a lot more miles and have a lot more people in them over time as they get shared. So I'm actually very optimistic about the manufacturing future. I think technology innovation will get roboticized if it's a repeatable process. But as you said earlier, I think the key is robots can't invent innovation, right? We have to create an innovation path. And I think the challenge is going to be workforce development. I think manufacturing is going to get high tech, and we have to invest in making the workforce capable of leveraging technology in new ways, whether that's polymer science, whether it's material science, whether that's discrete manufacturing, whether it's the paint line, whether it's cutting the cord in factories and going wireless, traceability, cybersecurity. These are all part of the transportation value chain. And so I'm very optimistic, actually, about where things are headed with technology.
Okay, well, I want to come back to that because, and I do want to come back to this question of location because that really gets at the core of the development side of this, doesn't it? Mr. Lee, I wanted to come to you, and you have the enviable position of sitting in an international institution that looks out at the world and studies this stuff. I wonder what the big trends are that are kind of top of your mind there in Vienna.
Thank you very much. That 1.5 years ago, I had a meeting with Dr. King, and we discussed the future manufacturing. He reminded me one issue. He said, Leon, now you are supporting member countries for industrial development. Do you ever have you ever thought about future manufacturing and those new industrial revolution, 3D printing? I can receive my order of the shirt in the afternoon without actually any manufacturing process. It's 3D printing. He really reminded me of the urgent issue about how to serve our member states better, to provide a strategy advices to them. We actually very quickly adapt to this new agenda, new industrial revolution, how UNIDO could support our member states to meet the challenges. Of course, according to our study, we have past 40 years study, empirical data, and start from the 1970. 40 years, basically those jobs, without big change. But now in the industrial revolution really will push us for some change, dramatic change, but not evenly among the different subsectors of industry manufacturing. So now change means opportunity and also challenge. One group of country, I do not worry about that. Those EU and those advanced country, industrialized country, they will adapt to the new situation very quickly. New technologies start from there. And what we concerned as a developing country, especially least developed countries, like African country, that 2/3 of the least developed are located. They are just start this manufacturing, new industrial revolution, inclusive, sustainable industrial, SDG Goal 9. And suddenly the new industrial revolution pushed them to a corner. If you cannot catch up with this trend, you will be left far, far away. Very hard to come back. This is one issue we feel that UNIDO has the responsibility, obligation to support this group of countries to moving with challenge. Second is we really believe that strategy for those especially developing countries is very, very important. Because look at the light industry maybe will be affected by this new industrial less than the heavy industry, those high-tech sectors. And those countries actually started with industry basically labor intensive. Those garment, shoes, so they will have a certain period of transition. A transition period will last a few years, maybe 5 or 10 years. And this will be a great opportunity for country to develop a strategy. Most important one is infrastructure. And hard infrastructure, we all believe, the railroad, highway. A soft infrastructure is digitalization. Digital highway is very important for them to have a leapfrog to catch up with opportunities. Another point is that we now connected to the most advanced front-end technology with Hanover Massey. Every year we've been there. We build a partnership with them. And the second is G20. They focus on new industrial revolution. We provide a report together with OECD on the new industrial revolution. What's the impact for developing countries? And third one is that we need to create some forums for those countries could share, learn, best practices in the world. So now we create many such kind of facilitation activities to support them. This is what we are thinking we are doing. I really would like to invite all the support from private sector, from the international organization like World Bank, IFC, Regional Development Bank to support us to our member country to meet the challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. I mean, I want to build on what he's just said there. And there's a way I look out at this, and I see what you've said, Raj, and what you've said, Raj, and what you said, Mary, and I look at this, and I see the potential for a real developing gap between the kind of the developed world, the rich world. As you say, Mr. Lee, you don't worry about the EU or the US and them adapting to this. I don't worry about my 9-year-old daughter and her ability to use an iPhone, which is remarkable to me, and to order stuff from Amazon, which is slightly annoying to me. But you were talking, both of you, about customization and that the kind of the consumer that pull factor, right? What they want now, and they want it quickly, and they want it the way they want it. But you're talking about buying power there in big markets, and that buying power and that kind of scale isn't necessarily there in a smaller country in Southeast Asia or in Africa or in Latin America. So Mary, what the risk of this gap? Walk us through that a little bit. And are you worried about that at all?
So I mean, again, that goes back to that question mark. So I think it is a risk that's real, but I think there are a number of different things sort of to keep in mind. And so I'm going to sort of talk about, in some sense, two of them. One is that there's a lot of differences within manufacturing in terms of the trends that I was talking about. There are sectors like electronics, like this transportation equipment, where the automation and the servicification and this sort of global concentration is all happening. And so keeping up with all of those trends is a more demanding sort of agenda for those countries that are in those subsectors. But as you were saying, there are things like the garments. There are others that are sort of more commodity processing, where the markets are much more regional, and there's a mix of how much this automation is really happening or at what kind of pace. So I think there's just, even on how much are these trends coming, some important variation to keep in mind. And I think that part of it, the customization actually holds out hope for far more local inputs, whether that's in the production or in some of the services, in some of the design, or on the post-production, that provide sort of more opportunities than there had been when there was much more a pure scale set of agenda. And I think the other part of the question is how much or how long the window is still open to be competitive using current technology versus needing to adopt new technology. So we've tried to put together sort of a framework when you think what is the policy advice that countries may need to follow. And we've put it in the context of 3 C's. So it's competitiveness, capabilities, and connectedness. And particularly for those economies still competing with current technology, the competitiveness agenda is really important. Having a good business environment, having the infrastructure, And then the connectedness as both a trade, a physical trade in moving goods and logistics, but also connectedness with this manufacturing and services. And those agendas are going to be important for, I think, all countries now to stay competitive. In terms of adopting new technology and being able to enter on that front, you enter some other kinds of things. So new kinds of business models within contracting, new kinds of competition issues in the competitiveness. But the capabilities agenda matters a lot more. So that's the skills for workers. It's the ability of firms, and including on their management, to be able to absorb and use new technology, and a slightly broader sense of what's the enabling environment that you need to enable more people and firms to absorb new technology. So that we were talking about data and some of the things around privacy, around security, the tradedness in data. If data is sort of the new currency and the real source of value, being able to have a supportive data ecosystem is going to be really critical to be able to be part of those new opportunities.
So, Raj from Ford, how does, when you look out at the world right now, and you look at this new manufacturing environment, you look at these wonderful products that you're coming up for, you look at the huge markets. I can see big markets in China for you. I can see big markets here in the U.S., Mexico, Brazil, places like that. But the scale of the market in this kind of new, nimble manufacturing world, how much hope is there for those kind of smaller countries? And how are you going to tackle those? How are you going to sell to them?
I don't know that Vietnam would be called a small country, but I'll just give you an example from the work we're doing there. Small is always something in our mind. We put smart cameras in one of the cities there to try and help us figure out with the city what kind of manufacturing capacity does the country actually need for mobility. So by definition, I think to scale any manufacturing footprint anywhere, you need entrepreneurship. And what entrepreneurs need is a transfer of technology. Director General Lee talked about the digital highway. I think digital highway and digital enablement is critical. We have to find a way of transferring know-how without friction, and allow that know-how to transform into local products. So don't ship finished assets, and don't just do technology licensing, but take the capability of innovation to a market and let the market scale it efficiently. I think the cornerstone of that really is entrepreneurship, is being able to find in industry, manufacturing industry, entrepreneurs that will be able to do the level of servicification that Mary talks about, as well as customization that makes that product appeal to the local market. I think the world is shrinking because people expect more customization and personalization. And I think the trade flows are changing because there's more local content being added. And I think that's an irreversible trend, actually, because entrepreneurs now are globally connected, and the digital highway that Mr. Lee talks about is an inevitable reality. I mean, whether you go on YouTube, you can pretty much learn how to make anything now, right? So we can't deny those factors. We have to embrace it. And being a large technology player in transportation services, we believe in that. And the way we're doing that is putting money behind acquisitions, putting entrepreneurs in new markets to do new things, like the example I provided in Vietnam, going to the city of Indore and partnering with them to think about how can they add new capacity. So I think we have to be a lot more flexible in our mindset and also change the way we go to market, which is what we're trying to do more of.
Okay. Raj, you want to jump in here? Sure.
Well, just the comment I would make is to all that was said, digital disruption. I mean, the stats that we've seen show that it is disrupting incumbent companies' revenue growth by 45%, their EBIT by 35%, and that has nothing to do with the developed world or developing world. It's a stat just in general. So when we think about production locations and deciding on where we go and how we establish them, again, the customer and the locality is going to really define what that process looks like, and that's a very, very tough thing to decipher. But again, I just like to use a few examples. So recently we built a factory in Chengdu, China, because of the growth of the Chinese market and the high demand for automation. So going back to what Mary said earlier, that there was a one-size-fits-all at one point in time, and here's where customization comes into play and becomes such a critical factor. So that plant produces 60% for the Chinese market. It makes 3 million products a year with a near perfect quality rating. It was built off a blueprint of one of our very most digital factories in Hamburg, Germany. And that blueprint was then brought over to China and established in China. But it's populated completely with a Chinese workforce. So localization becomes a critical topic there, because this is where the ingenuity occurs. This is where the perennial annuities occur. This is where you transfer knowledge from generation to generation. So whether we're doing something in Algeria or Turkey or Egypt or a developing environment, what we're finding is that it's extremely important to have localized presence, and that's to be rooted in the educational system of those countries, the political system of those countries. And when I just think of customer preference and localization, these two become the dominant factors in deciding where you put something, and that'll be the future.
What are you making in that factory?
Automation products.
Automation products. What does that mean?
So automation are automation for factories and programmable logic controllers and automation that automates any factory of any type.
And the customization relates to, I guess, the client needs in some way.
Exactly.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Lee, let's get back to this question of the gap there. I mean, are you seeing enough awareness out there? You said there was a need for awareness, but are you seeing enough awareness out there in the developing world, in poorer countries? And are you seeing them getting ready for this? I mean, are there any good examples of people who've got it right?
Thank you very much. There's certainly a gap there. As I mentioned, we provided a report to G20 for the new industrial revolution to this world, together with the OECD UNCTAD. The report actually consists of detailed analysis data for the gap between the advanced country, emerging market, and developing country, especially least developed country. I do not want to touch on details that you can check with data in the report. But here I just would like to mention that if industrialized countries, and they already developed lots of strategies, since 2008 financial crisis, and country really focusing on the new industrial revolution, and then like Japan, Germany, and the US all developed those kind of strategy to move ahead with the new industrial revolution challenge opportunities. And however, this is a big challenge for the least developed countries. But BRICS, like emerging market economies, I was invited to their Minister of Industry meeting and also Minister of Trade's meeting. And during the meeting, they discussed the new industrial revolution and the e-commerce. They reached an agreement to work together, share experience and technology, support the SME to meet the challenge of the new industrial revolution. But certainly we are invited to support them. But what I concerned most is least developed countries. But now they need the support from this international community. I visit countries, I visit the African countries, visit some Asian countries, Bangladesh, Cambodia. They request you need those support, international community support, for the challenge, to meet the challenge with some infrastructure, with human resources, with financial resources, with strategies, how to develop strategy to adapt to the new challenge. This is what we really being heard. So I'm really calling for the international support to this group of country. And if we miss this opportunity, miss this time to support this group of country, and then very hard to catch up. Thank you.
Mary, I want to come back to you because it seems like these discussions always come back to a question of human capital as well in terms of training. I mean, here in the U.S., one of the things we hear from manufacturers and companies is just a lack of the skilled workforce, and that we're talking about the world's largest economy here, and we're talking about what should be a place that is good at providing trained workers for major companies. I wonder how that fits in again with this question of the future. Just build on that a bit for me.
So I think that is a huge part of this agenda, is having the skills, and some of the kinds of skills that are going to be needed are going to be shifting. But I think there's different kinds of skills. So there's the usual numeracy, literacy. There's increasing importance on some of the creativity, some of the personal skills that a robot can't replace, and that importance of that. I think the other sort of set of skills that has had less attention is some of the management skills. And a lot of these more data-driven technology processes, to really be effective, the management in a firm needs to understand how to plan, how to have that feedback, how to adjust, and really sort of use that own data in how they manage their own firm. And that isn't traditionally one of the sort of skill sets we've been sort of supporting and encouraging systems to really be able to strengthen. So I do think that that's an important part.
So the World Bank's going to get into the MBA business, is it? I want to throw this open to the floor. I could monopolize the conversation here all day, but I won't. And there's lots of eminent-looking people in this audience. So if you want to just raise your hand, I'd ask you to ask a question rather than a speech, and please identify yourself as well.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rosemary Segero, and my company is Segero's International Group. I'm based here in Washington, D.C., and I focus on small and medium businesses in manufacturing. In fact, I'm part of the U.S. Congress and Senate's manufacturing caucus here. Though I come from Kenya, we're looking, but I want to talk about, I'm not talking, how do you look at this manufacturing, especially now with the new technology in Africa? Here we are talking about conflicts and violence. As Mr. Lee said, I support him. Let's come up with a solution of training people to understand the machines can work, but as well, they can work. So when the machines are there, and then there are no jobs for them, and then they start fighting. Are they going to fight the machines? Are they going to fight the people? So we should look at the advantage and disadvantage. And also, as Mr. Lee, how do we bring the small and medium businesses into the game? They need training, like using the German model apprenticeship to train skills for job creation. How do we collaborate? Let's come up with conferences, seminars, and learn how the machines are going to do, how people are going to work, and then it's a win-win situation for the machines and for the people, and then the work is done. Thank you. Okay. So how are we going to do this still with this situation?
Okay, before we do that, we're going to collect a couple of questions. There was one over, there we go, right at the, just over here. Yep. Go ahead, sir. Just turn on your microphone. No, those are the votes. I think the other ones.
Franco Fornassari, I used to be an executive in the auto industry, and I'm very intrigued by this notion that this new manufacturing will actually break down the value chain and localize more. I wonder if you could expand a little bit on the reasoning, because if you bring services and manufacturing together, the business model will probably carry some kind of heavy duty in the structuring of the overall service that you provide, mobility, whatever you want to call it. But could you comment on the business model and the integration versus localization?
Okay, and we'll just collect one more from the floor, from the woman with her hand up just there. If you can just step up to the microphone at the table in front of you. Yeah. Oh, there it is.
Hi, I'm Nikki, and my question is both to Mr. Batra and Mr. Rao, essentially because of their Indian surnames. So I'm from India, and we hear far too much from the Indian politicians about the 800 million people under the age of 35. But equally, we have a large population, unemployed or underemployed, or who've stopped looking for work simply because there is none. When you're talking about skills, what are those skills that large populations with low incomes need and can get easily?
Okay, who wants to jump in first? Mary, do you want to jump in on Africa?
Sure. So a couple of different things. I mean, the jobs agenda is obviously critical, and I think one of the things, I mean, manufacturing has been incredibly important as a vehicle for providing jobs, particularly for a number of less skilled workers, and helping raise productivity. And I know it's a big debate in a number of countries as to how important it is to be trying to industrialize now, how long a window there may be to still be able to do that. I think some of the things that are important about manufacturing in that, there's still scope within existing technologies, and there's also scope within other kinds of services. So it's sort of less that you know how to use this particular machine than you know how to run a business, that you understand what the needs are, how to meet what your customer's demanding, meet the standards, meet the quality, meet the price, and being able to sort of scale that up. So manufacturing offers opportunities certainly to do that, and to the extent they're traded, it gives you an opportunity to really gain on productivity as well. And I think there's still a range of opportunities to do that. And in terms of the SMEs, I mean, this is sort of one of the, I think you were sort of saying, some of this, the fact that some of this is digitized and there's opportunities to come in with much less capital and being able to really use your ideas opens up the possibility for a lot of new firms to come in and to make a difference in their markets. And the importance of some of this localization and taking a product and having tweaks on it or having certain characteristics that reflect local demand give opportunities for local firms and smaller firms to get involved in a broader range of activities. So I think there's some scope with the new technology, in fact, to be able to open doors to more SMEs.
Go ahead.
On that. Yeah, thank you. Let me also make one comment from the technology side. On the term I want to use is scalability of technology. How scalable these technologies are. And I prefaced my comments earlier by saying this is not just a rich person's game anymore. So even if you think of a place like the United States, and we all think this, we're in great shape, but we have an aging workforce. We are, a couple million workers are eligible for retirement in the next decade. We don't have enough STEM-based disciplines. We don't have enough digital capability and technology. I mean, the same incubation of expertise and dissemination of knowledge has to occur even in this environment. We're truly not out of the woods. We're not ready for the digital revolution. The maturity models in digital are very low. So those are things that all have to be addressed. But the point I want to make is scalability, because scalability, you're talking for a few $100s an asset. You can have an internet connection, a tablet, and generate an app. You can look at data anywhere in the world. You can use ingenuity. And I just wonder, where people have a populace that's far greater than the United States, how much ingenuity really exists there? How do we tap that potential with education? And it may not be a tremendous amount. It may be that you just scratch the surface and then things work on their own, and then what you get out of it finally are tremendous breakthroughs in innovation and progress that can serve the world market. And this is where scalability, connectedness, being part of IoT. I mean, there was experiments done to show, kids in slums in Delhi that, they put a computer in a hole and they had a camera fixed to it, and it was amazing what these kids did finally with that computer, how they learned it on their own, how they self-taught, how they disseminated that to others. So, the question is, we have to scratch the surface. I would even argue that education is far more important than technology itself, because that's an enabler.
Mr. Lee, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I appreciate the question raised by the madam from the Kenya. This is a very pertinent question to me. Actually, as a DG of UNIDO, we always concerned about how we could support our member states, especially those least developed countries, to move up with challenge for industrial development. Now the situation is that the African continent, they committed to the 2063 transformation agenda, based on the industrial development, a transformation of economy based on agriculture development, industrial development. This is a 54 countries' commitment to this, 50 years, 2063. And now what's happening is really new industrial revolution push them to think how to move ahead. And international community, I think, already give enough notice, very big notice, attention to African countries' industrialization. UN General Assembly last year, July 25th, adopted resolution for third industrial development decade for Africa. This is a very strong support from international community. G20 put Africa industrialization as an agenda start from last year in China, this year Germany, and they compact for Africa, selected 7 countries. And now we are very happy to see that they really create a kind of momentum to support them, but how to actually look at the gap between the advanced countries and the least developed countries. Very big, but I really believe the leaders in that group of countries really would like to have a big catch-up, need support to them. So you need to develop a kind of program. We call it Program for Country Partnership. It's to really support the country's industrial sector development. Like Ethiopia with Senegal, 2 pilot countries. Ethiopia, we develop the 3 pillars of the manufacturing. One is food processing, second leather, third is textile. Now the industrial park moving dramatically, and then thousands of jobs are created for young men, young lady. You will be impressed when you visit the industrial park. This is, but they need this kind of labor-intensive manufacturing. But light industry will last maybe for a certain period of time. This is why very important for them. And other countries now will follow the case. Senegal is Agropole for agriculture processing. They build an industrial park. I believe that also will need the manufacturing, labor-intensive manufacturing. But another important development, Sean, is that President Kagame from Rwanda organized a very famous group they call Smart Africa. It's really focusing on digitalization. Rwanda is a small country, and they develop a very advanced broadband system. This is one of the encouragement we would like to see, and we will support more about this kind of trend. Thank you.
Raj, do you want to jump in? There's a question there on automotive supply chains, and but then maybe we can flip into also that question on skills in India, which matches up with the question we've been getting online on what skills will be required for developing countries.
Yeah, both questions. So the first one is I'll point to a battery joint venture in China. So when you go into the market like China, you examine the local skill base, and you also look at what does China excel in. Battery is their future. So we redesign our platform to take advantage of that through a joint venture, and then we change our manufacturing footprint. With AV, it's all electric, whether it's plug-in or hybrid. So that's then going to be extended outside of China. So in that model, I think the value chain is about componentizing and localizing the platform itself. You then add on to that services, right, and partnering with local service innovators. It becomes even more customized for what the AV actually does, or a battery-powered vehicle actually does. And then you get into the service life cycle. Who's going to maintain that vehicle? So by definition, we're finding that unless we embrace that and we break the current value chain in the industry, we can't take advantage of the inherent strengths that countries already have and the investments they're making. I think it was Nikita who asked the question there about India. I think my observation last week when I visited Chennai, we had an entrepreneur come and talk to us about blowhorn. So blowhorn is very much like what Alibaba experienced in China, where people want stuff delivered to them. It's a big logistical nightmare where the average speed in Bangalore is 9 kilometers an hour. And getting something fetched to you is not easy. So blowhorn, Srivatsa, who founded that company, basically is creating a logistics company purely on software. So he's taking a downtime that auto rickshaws have during the day to deliver mini parcels at about 80 paisa per kilometer. Now that's much more yield for them than waiting around waiting for a passenger, and it level loads deliveries. And it allows you to do micro deliveries. With the investment that SoftBank just announced for Ola, they're going to create 60,000 new drivers in India. So I think it's the hard skills that one has to learn to transport stuff, but also the soft skills to plug themselves into the digital economy. And I think those 250 million Indians you're talking about who are underemployed, I don't think they're looking for the perfect job, but I think that is the gig economy. What can I do to take on a more entrepreneurial career? And what jobs can I add into my portfolio to be gainfully employed? I think the days where you have one job and that becomes your career is not realistic. So I very much have empathy for that question. I think we are trying our level best to invest in India and enable those kind of outcomes, because I think that leapfrogging is what's going to take place. People who can use those rickshaw drivers use a very simple phone, and they're self-literate, right? They learn from each other, also YouTube channels, but it's need-based learning. It's not that somebody tells me go learn this. It's more about I identify an opportunity. Somebody has identified it. I want to learn that skill because I want to move forward. And I'm surprised how much passion those people have to get out of the rut of poverty. That they will embrace those skills and teach themselves. And they don't want to be taught. They want to be self-taught. I think, and then take that skill and find a way of being productive in their life doing it. So I just think we're past the tipping point now.
Before I go back to the floor, Mary, I want to come to you with a question from online from Roy Badaro, who asks, what are the top 5 potential industries for very small countries?
Well, so I think this example from Rwanda is actually very interesting. So it's not just small, it's small and landlocked, right? And they have invested more than any other country on the continent really in this broadband. And the challenge for Rwanda then is having the complementary human capital skills to take advantage of that ICT infrastructure. But I think it does open up an incredible potential, because if they can do those kind of services, the distance and the fact that the population isn't that big doesn't matter, right? So I think that kind of thing holds real potential. I think this question of this sort of localization and customization, you definitely see it across many, many sectors, and it does work in the favor of big countries. It also works in the favor of little countries that are neighbors or that are physically connected. And so Ethiopia is not small, but one of the things that's been really critical in its success in its push on this manufacturing is this investment in the rail to Djibouti. And so the connectedness, both physically on the infrastructure, but also through trade, is critical in making little countries connected to much bigger markets. And so more than sort of what particular sector, really being plugged in and connected, I think is going to be critical. For a number of other countries, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to exactly 5 of them, but a number of the sort of more commodity-based processing, so a lot of the food and beverages, wood products, those are ones where there's a lot of opportunity. Some of the things like rubber and plastics and chemicals used to be, they're starting to be automated more. So there it depends a bit more on some of these countries' ability to be using some of the new technology as well. So I would emphasize the being connected and potentially these ICT links as key ways of going forward.
Okay, should we go back to the floor? Question all the way in the back there, and then we'll come to you.
Thanks. My name is Ashish Khanna. I'm with World Bank. My question to the panel is, what is the public policy role in this? Beyond improving doing business and physical infrastructure, should governments try to pick up winners, as we had the last question, and then work towards creating an ecosystem of these skills, or that's for private sector and no government funds or government-owned provisions are really needed on this?
Okay, and then there was a quick question over here.
My name is Satyam. I come from, I look after the Mauritius, which is a middle-income country. And the middle-income country trap is very often talked about, and the challenges of getting onto the pathway of the digitalization roadmap. So any advice for these countries? Anything research has been done to help middle-income countries get out of the middle-income country trap?
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm unfortunately I'm going to close it there because we've just got about 4 minutes left, and we need time to hear some answers. And I'm going to do something bold here. I'm going to take the public policy question, and I'm going to ask the private sector. Who wants to start? What do you need from government to make this work?
So just to, I mean, if I address that, this is a topic, even in Siemens, that's very, very high on the agenda. I mean, our CEO, Joe Kaeser, talks about business to society. And if you're in business, the expectation of being in business is that you serve society, otherwise you shouldn't be in business. So when we think about these educational initiatives, working with governments, it's, in our view, always a partnership. It is very atypical for government to do it alone, and it's very atypical for the private sector to do it alone. It has to be a partnership. I mean, I can tell you, even in the developed environment where we've put new factories up or new manufacturing locations up, you know, we always need to do some self-training, self-education, simulation, you know, and these are people that don't have a lot of background in that technology. So it tells me that with the right intellectual aptitude, the right intellectual horsepower, and the right private-public involvement, we can do really amazing things. And I don't know why Mauritius or any other country would not fall under that categorization. So I think it's in my view always a joint effort, and that's how we approach it.
Raj, do you want to jump in? What do you?
I completely agree.
Just your microphone.
I completely agree with what my colleague here, Raj Batra, said on the panel. My direct experience with this was with the new Planning Commission in India. So they scrapped the Planning Commission in India after 57 years, and they replaced it with Niti Aayog, which is they appointed a CEO, Amitabh Kant, and we participated in a charrette for mobility and transportation infrastructure planning back in February. By May, they published a 15-year vision paper and operationalized teams that were then responsible for transferring the smart city funding based on actual plans that could get implemented. We took that challenge, went to city of Indore, as I mentioned earlier, as well as the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, and worked partnering with them to create mobility capacity and doing it through local projects. So I think that kind of public stance is very key, that the public side of this participates with the right metrics, that it's about productivity gain, it's about advancing infrastructure and create very specific goals and hold the bureaucracy accountable to ensure that that comes through. Then I think they can get the best out of private investment. And I think that kind of roadmap is very exciting.
Mary, I'm going to come back to you, come back to the public sector on public policy, but also this middle income trap question.
Okay. I mean, I think that the question that you ask is really important, and we tried to address it in the book, not rehashing all of industrial policy, but what's the delta? How is technology in particular, changed some of that? Because on the one hand, we're saying, the ability to be an attractive location, that the bar is rising and it's harder, so maybe the only way to do it is precisely to pick a few sectors and back them. At the same time, you're hearing how things are moving really quickly, and it's not at all clear how well governments are going to be able to pick them or to know exactly how to do that. And the second part, you answered in some of it with the second part of your question, which was the ecosystem. And I think increasingly the sort of ecosystem and these connections across sectors, the links with suppliers, the links to services, makes it really hard to do a narrow sort of intervention particularly successfully. That sort of being an isolated attempt to try and pick one thing is less likely to work when you really precisely need that kind of ecosystem. I think in terms of sort of some of this middle income trap, I mean, this is always sort of a question. I think what's interesting now is for a lot of middle income countries, you see actually sort of a dynamism in the kinds of activities that they're involved in, and sort of a shifting in the kinds of mix of goods, particularly, that they're involved in, and far more sort of movement on some of the services potential. So I think that there is scope for those economies that, again, are sort of open and building on some of these capabilities to position themselves to take advantage of some of the sort of new opening kinds of products and kinds of markets if they take advantage of it. So I'm just going to go back to my question mark in the title. I think that there are these opportunities, but just sort of waiting back for them to come is probably not their strategy. And that things are changing. There's some urgency. There's things that can be done. And really focusing on where those opportunities and the broader enabling environment that you need for people to take advantage of them will help you answer that question.
Well, thank you very much, Mary, and that's all the time that we have right now. So if you can join me in thanking the panel. And you also get something very special out of this, of course. Besides all of the thoughts that have been provoked by this panel, you get to take home some homework and do it all. Enjoy the rest of your day.